Yeah.
or a bad guy in some way. And are you looking for a fallibility in a character? Does that make it easier to play, or is it fun sometimes to just play, you know, a real badass?
Well, nobody wants to play that like really nice, smug, goody two-shoes character, you know, that sort of holier than thou. That stuff that ends up being dull, and nobody likes those people anyway. You know, so you think like, oh my gosh, somebody who's always right and stuff. You know, that becomes tiresome. But I mean, everyone, we're all fallible. The other thing I think about getting older, moving through life, is you start to realize that a person's life, a personality, contains so much stuff, and there are times when maybe you, I don't know, it's almost like a family member in a sense. If you can kind of look at the world, the entire world, as if they were a family member, and you realize there can be a lot of elasticity in how we view someone who's very close. You know, you can have a big fight with your sister and then manage to make it up the next day and stuff. You know, you have these, I don't know, there's an allowance in it. So if you kind of look at everybody in the world with that sort of allowance, like, you know, people are having a hard time and they're not communicating, they're not feeling safe, they're not feeling what, you know, you're always trying to figure out what is it that's shaping this behavior. And yes, I'm always looking for that.
How much do you think your personal history of moving around a lot as a kid kind of impacted your interest in finding these kind of characters?
Oh, tremendously. I mean, so many actors become, I mean, there's so many people from, you know, military backgrounds or embassy backgrounds or traveling salesmen or ministry. You know, so many people who've traveled or have had kind of itinerant childhoods become actors. So clearly it's a causal kind of thing, you know. I think what happens is that you learn that, I think a lot of people think that behavior is character. They think because so-and-so behaves this way, they are X. And the one thing that you learn when you move around a lot is that, no, behavior is just behavior. And there's things about people and about character that can be universal. So you're always trying to figure that out. Like, you know, the way people speak, the way they move, the way they, you know, some stuff is cultural. Some stuff is emotional, whatever, but it's not, but that behavior that you think is characteristic of someone is always, you can always change that.
Did you learn any accents?
Oh, everywhere, you have to. Well, because everyone speaks a little bit differently everywhere you live, so you have to make sure that you don't stick out by speaking like the place you just left. And, you know, and the thing about accents is fascinating to me is that, you know, you don't lose an accent, you actually acquire a new one. Henry Kissinger and Ted Koppel evidently both left Germany at the same age, 18. I know, right? So obviously Ted Koppel made a choice at some point not to sound like Henry Kissinger. So, you know, but I mean, it's really fascinating to me because you have to listen very hard. You have to change the way you speak to so-called lose an accent. You're not losing it, you're acquiring something else.
Is there anyone that you prefer doing? Do you have a favorite accent?
A favorite accent? No. No. One of the things that happens, one of the like byproducts of accent speaking is that sometimes your muscles start to ache in a different kind of way because people move their jaws differently or place their voice differently depending on where you're from. So at the end of the day, you know, you're like, oh, I can't take it. Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about Shortcuts, which is one of your earlier movies and one of my favorites.
Thank you.
At that point, were you living in New York? Were you living in Los Angeles?
I was living in New York, yeah. And Bob Altman was my hero, you know. I mean, he was somebody who I somehow managed to grow up in the 70s not seeing any Altman movies because I just would see whatever was at the movie theater, and that was not MASH or whatever, you know. But when I was in college in Boston, they used to have revival houses, and I saw 3 women at Revival House, and I was like, wow, what was that? You know, who was that? It was the first time I'd really noticed the presence of a director on screen. Like, I was just like, wow, somebody made this movie, and he's saying something, and I want to know who that is. And I got very excited, and then saw, you know, all his movies after that. So when I got the call to do Shortcuts with Bob, I was just beside myself.
As an actress, at what point did you realize that you were going to have to deal with potentially being naked on camera, deal with your body and having people see that? Is that something that they learn in school, or do you realize that?
Yeah, you never know, right? No, at school they don't tell you anything. They barely. I didn't even know I had to have an agent when I got out of school. I was like, hey, what are you talking about? I literally knew nothing. I think it becomes. It just. I don't know. That stuff sort of reveals itself. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting because I've had experiences like I did with Bob, where obviously it seemed very risky and stuff, and yet he made me completely comfortable, and I feel that it was used physically in only the best way, and in a way that's kind of shocking and upsetting and intimate and moving and all that. And then I've also had experiences in movies where I'm like, this was completely unnecessary. How did I end up in this situation? And I learned it pretty early on, so when I did have that situation where I was like, how'd I end up here? Then you kind of know. Then you go like, okay, that I don't want to do. I mean, even in Kids Are All Right, the funny thing was, I really didn't want to show anything because I didn't think it would be funny, I literally thought the minute you saw my body, you'd stop laughing. Because, no, not that way. But because people do. Because we suddenly go, oh, wait, look, I can see that. And then it's not funny anymore. And I really wanted it to be. So I said to Mark, because Lisa didn't want clothes to be on because she thought that would look ridiculous, and it does. When somebody keeps their bra on a sex scene, you think like, come on, But because Mark and I know each other very well, I kept myself glued to him. I said, whatever you do, don't disengage from my chest. And so we rolled around and did whatever, and I think as a consequence, the scene, tonally remains in the place we want it to be. But you do learn. It's like anything else. You learn about what's effective, what the tone is going to be, what is going to be prurient. You figure it out.
Have your attitudes about that kind of stuff changed, as you've gotten older in your career, or even now because we are able to sort of freeze frame in a way, or capture stuff online?
That's weird. I mean, that's weird, and that's all happened so fast. The internet and all that stuff. That I don't really think about that because I feel like once again, how do you can't control something that way. But no, I still do look at it in terms of what I think. What is the movie? What's the scene about? Like I said, in Kids, I wanted to make sure that it was funny, that it was So that was my intention there.
What do you ever think about the audience as an actor?
In what way? Like what?
Well, first of all, when you're making an independent movie, at some point you have to ask, is someone going to come see this movie?
Who is this for? Yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah, and that way you always do. But I think that because I know that there's an audience for movies about stories for people, I know that there is because I'm one of them. I like stories about people and character and that kind of thing. So I know that exists. So that's obviously, yes, that's who who you're making the movie for. And there's nothing more gratifying than being, when I was on the beach this last summer, we have a place in Long Island, and I would have people stop me on the beach and say, I thought that was you, I loved that movie, that was great, and I loved the family, and and then you're like, wow, yeah, you want people to see your movies. You do make them for an audience. You don't make them for yourself.
Are there any characters then, though, that have stayed with you over the years?
They all do, and they all don't. It's like it's like they're like people that you knew, kind of. So you remember them and you remember their qualities, but they don't. But it's not like Sybil, where you can reach in and pull somebody out. They're kind of, you're like, wow, that character. Oh yeah, you remember. I mean, Ray Fiennes and I used to make this joke too, that sometimes you're acting so hard that you really believe that you've changed your physiognomy. So the disappointment is when you actually see the movie and you're like, oh, it's still me. So that's really hard, because you do in your head you think, I've done it this time. That's a completely different face. So I think that's the biggest disappointment, actually, that you don't actually transform.
Do you ever have to work as hard to get out of a character as you did to get into it?
Not when you have children. Because you have them, you know, they're there half the time. They're on the set with me. When my son was a baby, I did a lot of movies where he was on the set in my trailer, sometimes just like literally on the set. So you know, you have to really, you're like, now I'm working, now I'm not, now I'm, you know, and you can't drag it around in a way.
Did having kids affect the kind of movies that you make? Either in a logistical sense or?
Logistically, absolutely, because I have 2 kids in school. You know, one is in 3rd grade and one is in 7th grade, and as any parent knows, it's an incredibly busy life, you know, with school kids, because they have, you know, they have their, all the things that they do in school, and then they have all the after-school things, and they have all their friends, and so it's not, so you can't say, yeah, I'll take that movie in Germany for 4 months. You just can't. You say, you know, when kids are all right, it was going to be in LA, and then at one point Lisa said, because I could only do it in LA in the summertime, and then Lisa said, I'm going to move it to, if I move it to New York, when can you do it? I said, if you move it to New York, I can do it anytime, because they're in school and it doesn't matter. And then we moved it to New York, and then Annette had a problem with her kids, and she had to stay in LA. So I said, okay, if you move to LA, we'll just do it in the summer. You know, so it was all this kind of back and forth. But yeah, that's the biggest thing, really. It's just, I think with any working parent, you have to figure out, when can I work? When, you know, when can everybody go away, or, you know, can I take a little job and go away for, you know, a week or 2, or like Single Man was 3 days. That was easy, because I was only gone for a few. No, I mean, that's what's complicated about it.
How often do the kids watch your movies?
Never. But not because, I mean, it's just not an issue. I think that the other thing about children is that, you know, children are not innately interested in what their parents do for a living, nor should they be. And if I went up to any of you in the audience and said, quick, what does your mom do? Describe